Okay, so tonight's main topic is we're going to be looking at primarily numbers and a little bit more about pages for iWork. But before we get onto that, I just wanted to give us some background so everybody knows what we're talking about. So we're particularly talking about the Sierra versions of the iWork applications. So that's Pages, Numbers and Keynote, but I'm using Keynote, but I'm not going to talk about it much. It's Numbers is the main thing we're talking about tonight. Okay, so the three applications, Keynote, which is used for doing presentations, such as this one. Pages, which is for word processing and page layout, all the other way around, as you see fit. And Numbers, which is a spreadsheet. No, I know. I don't know what's going on there. It's delayed. Don't forget, it'll be a 30-second delay anyway, so don't worry about that. But I don't know why that's not showing anything more than the original El Capitan screen. It may or may not be working. Okay, iWork 09 is the version that many people have been using for many years. So, sorry? Yep, okay. Apple introduced it as implied by the name in 2009. It included versions 5 of Keynote, version 4 of Pages, and version 2 of Numbers. Obviously, that wasn't the first version. I could go back to the very first version here, iWork 05. That wasn't actually quite the first version, because before that, Apple released Keynote as a separate application, version 1, back in 2003. So it dates back that far. And Keynote originated because Steve Jobs wanted a better way of doing presentations at Apple's media events, and they actually developed Keynote to run the presentation at Apple's media events, so that's where it originated. And then they decided to add Pages and eventually Numbers. Okay, so the original release of iWork 09 came out far enough ago that it was still supporting Tiger and Leopard, so it was running on PowerPC Macs and Intel Macs right back to the 2005-ish operating system, so it was quite a long time ago. As Apple has released over time they added updates to iWork 09, adding support for new operating systems. So Snow Leopard got supported, then Lion, then Mountain Lion over time. Unfortunately, the later versions dropped support for older operating systems, and you couldn't get the updates to iWork 09 unless you were running a new enough operating system. So, for example, you couldn't get the last update unless you were running Lion or later. So I've occasionally had to help people who are still running Snow Leopard finally upgrading to something more modern and still have the very, very old version of iWork 09, and you can't easily find the software updates for it anymore. You have to go manually download them. The last version supported Mountain Lion officially, and that was Keynote version 5.3, Pages 4.3, and Numbers 2.3. So that's as far as that version went. And based on my regular use of it, they all still work reasonably well on macOS Sierra. So, rolling ahead a few years, when macOS 10.9 came out in late 2013, Apple introduced a totally new version of the iWork applications. And these were a complete rewrite. And what they did is they released Keynote 6, Pages 5 and Numbers 3. They looked completely different. They had the same basic functionality, but they stripped out a whole bunch of features. And in effect what they did was they took the iOS version, the iPad version of the app, and ported it back to the Mac. So they had a common code base for the iOS and the Mac versions, but it wasn't the same as iWork 09, threw out a lot of features, and that meant if you were used to using certain features of the old version, you pretty much couldn't use the new version because those features simply weren't there anymore. So people like me and Graham doing the magazine, we've stuck with the iWork 09 version since 2000 and probably 10 or 11 or something like that when we started using it, and we're still using it to do the magazine these days. Because the later version simply didn't do what we needed for doing things like split articles spanning multiple pages. You couldn't do that with the new version. When they did this update for the new version of Pages and Numbers and Keynote, they made them free as long as you bought a new computer. So anybody who bought a new Mac from late 2013 onwards got a free copy of iWork with it. Prior to that, you had to actually buy iWork. It was a commercial product, unless you either got it from App Store or buying it as on a DVD or something like that one. The feature set was roughly the same as the iOS version. There are actually a few features the Mac versions have which are not in the iOS versions, but they're relatively minor. And the iOS and Mac versions have compatible document formats. So, as I've mentioned, missing features. If you want to exchange iWork documents between the iOS versions of the applications and the Mac versions, you need to be running the latest operating system in sync with each other. So if you're running an older operating system on one device, you've got to stay on an older operating system on the other device to keep running the older version of the application. If you upgrade one of them and get the latest applications, it may stop being compatible with your older version on the other operating system. So it's a bit of a pain. They sort of step up in lockstep. So since that version, every year Apple has released a new version of Pages, Numbers and Keynote in sync with each new operating system release as they come up with a new version again. So rolling ahead 3 years, we're now up to 10.12 Sierra. In late 2016, to the iWork application. Now we're up to Keynote 7, Pages 6 and Numbers 4. These versions require Sierra, which means if you aren't running the latest operating system, you can't run the latest applications. And this pattern there's only one exception to that. The previous version, the 3.6 of Numbers, for example, was released with El Capitan, but it actually ran on Yosemite, much to my surprise. It was about the only time Apple's done that in recent years. So generally speaking, you need to run the latest operating system to get the latest version of these applications. And the other thing that Apple did is now everybody can get these applications for free. You don't have to buy a new computer, you just need to upgrade to Sierra and you can get the iWork applications which run on Sierra for free, whether or not you had it before. And again, compatibility with iOS. You need to be running Sierra in sync with iOS 10 if you want to be able to exchange documents back and forth because they use the same document format. I haven't gone into a lot of detail on these slides about compatibility with older versions. Generally speaking, you can move from an older version to a newer version, and there are limited downgrade sort of export features on the Mac, but not on iOS. So for example, all of the Numbers version 3 and later can export in iWork 09 Numbers format if you need to. So you can go back to the old version again, and they can also import from iWork 09 without any problems. The iOS ones generally are a one-way trip. You can import to the current version, you can't export to an older version. It is worth noting you can import and export other file formats like Excel or Word or something like that as well, but that may involve format changes which could be fatal to your document or at least mess up the formatting. Okay, so since the release of Sierra, Apple has surprisingly kept updating these applications. We're currently up to version 7.2, 6.2 and 4.2, and each of the minor point updates have actually added some notable new features. And one of them, which appeared in the latest update for Pages, was linked text boxes. So in principle, it may now be possible for us to do our user group magazine using the current version of Pages because it actually has the features we need. Now, as for Numbers, I have been sticking to the old version of Numbers out of principle for many years because I was familiar with it. I've now started to use the new version for some things and I haven't run into any major problems with it yet. So I'm expecting I'll gradually move over to use the new version of Numbers and probably Pages as well. This is my first real test of Keynote tonight to see how it behaves, and I've found a few annoyances already with it compared to the old version, at least if you're creating a presentation. Now, thinking ahead a bit further, later this year and probably next month, Apple's going to release macOS High Sierra, version 10.13. And they may release a new version of the iWork applications, which may require High Sierra. We don't know until it actually happens. So we may find that the feature set we've got now, they may add yet more new features, but you've got to upgrade your operating system to get them, which could be a problem. iWork 09 has not had any updates since 2012 or maybe early 2013, so it's getting very long in the tooth, and if there are any compatibility problems, Apple's not going to fix them. And then going ahead one more year after that, in late 2018, Apple's going to release 10.14. And we already know it's going to complain if you run old 32-bit applications, one of which is iWork 09. So it will it will grumble at you at the very least if you try and run an old application, assuming it still works that far ahead. And then roll on one more year. macOS 10.15 is due for release in late 2019, and we know it will not run 32 applications, and that means it cannot run iWork 09. So basically, there is a 2-year cut-off for running iWork 09 if you want to be able to run the latest operating system. So that's the main reason I'm now working out how to get myself off it, to make sure that if the new versions are sufficient, I'm going to be able to run the new versions instead. If they're not, I need to switch to something completely different, and that's going to throw me quite badly for a while, I think. Oh, yes, 10.15 that should say, sorry. Thank you. I keep doing that. I keep writing 10.3 instead of 10.13. I've gone back a decade. Now, there is a possible workaround, which may be practical in some cases. I already use this method to run iWorks on recent operating systems on very rare occasions when I still need to access old documents, in that you run virtual machine software such as VMware Fusion or Parallels Desktop. You run an older macOS version inside that virtual machine, which is compatible with the application that you need to run, and then you install the old application on that old operating system inside the virtual machine. So effectively what you get is a window showing you an older Mac running on the newer Mac, and inside that older Mac you can run the older application. That's fine for things you use occasionally. It's not fine for things you're using all the time because it's cumbersome. But it's okay for occasionally needed things. And as I said, I use it for things like iWorks. I sometimes need it for a very old version of FileMaker. If I'm feeling nostalgic, I can run my Eudora back from 2011 was when I last ran that sort of thing, but I haven't had a need to, so that's just there in case I need it, and it's been not an issue. Okay. Now, I found some books which might be useful for people to know about if you want to learn more about the iWork applications. First of all, the iBooks store, and iBooks is a standard application on everybody's Mac if you're running a recent application. They've got starter guides from Apple, which are basically educational aids for learning how to use basic features of these applications. And they look quite good. It was kind of like a nice big picture sort of picture book kind of thing, showing you this is how you go through each of these steps for these basic tasks. So it's definitely worth getting those because they're just free guides you can download. All you need to do is run iBooks, go into the iBooks store, search for Pages Mac, I found was the easiest thing to search for, or Numbers Mac or Keynote Mac. And it's 100-ish megabyte download for the Keynote one. It was smaller for the Pages and Numbers ones. There are a series of books called Take Control, which have got a whole bunch of tutorials for a whole bunch of Mac-related things, like how to upgrade to a new operating system, how to run various applications, and they've done a set of books for the iWork applications. They've got one for Pages, one for Numbers, and one for Keynote. The Pages book, called Take Control of Pages, is updated at least as of version 6, but it's not quite up to the very latest update, so it dates back to late last year rather than this year, but it's close enough that it covers the majority of the features. The Numbers and Keynote ones haven't been rewritten yet for recent versions, so they still date back to the Yosemite versions, but they are at least the new style of Pages and Numbers and of Numbers and Keynote, sorry. And given those versions of the books, you could at least get a basis for understanding how things have changed if you're used to the old version and you want to know where things have moved in the new version, or at least some basic ideas. And I had a quick look through the Numbers one, and I've already learnt something just from a quick skim through it, a feature I hadn't actually spotted before. So there's some useful stuff in there. I don't remember the pricing offhand. I've seen them for about $20-something each through the iBook store. They're actually available through iBooks as well as a purchased book. And you can order it from the Take Control's website as well if you want to. And they make them available as a PDF, an EPUB, which will open in iBooks, or as a Mobi file, which will open on a Kindle. So you can get all three formats if you want to once you've bought it. There's also a Missing Manual series book called iWork, the Missing Manual. However, it was printed in 2014 and hasn't been updated, so it only covers the even older Mavericks version of 10.9, that is, of iWork, so it's more dated than the other options. So if you want to pick a book, start with the free ones from Apple, possibly have a look at the Take Control ones. I've actually got them if people want to have a quick glance at some point, but I may not have time to show you tonight. Okay? The take control ones are not. No, they're about $20-something each. The iBooks ones from Apple are free. They're just download and get them. Okay, so main thing I want to cover tonight was numbers. So I'm just going to give us some background to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about, because I'm going to be liberally using standard buzzwords for spreadsheets, and I want to make sure you know what I'm talking about, okay? So conceptually, a spreadsheet is information organised into tables, okay? That's probably, hopefully everybody knows that much. Tables have rows which go across the screen and they're numbered, so that they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. And columns going vertically, and they have letters. They usually go A through Z, then AA, AB, AC, and as many columns as you might need. The thing that you have at the intersection of a row and a column is called a cell. So it's one entry, one location within the table in which you can put things. You can have headings on your rows and columns, optionally. You can turn them off if you don't need them. And there is no structure imposed on how you organise data inside the table. You can put anything you like anywhere. It doesn't actually matter where you put it, except if you want to understand it again afterwards. It's better to be organised. There can be both a blessing because you have freedom to structure things how you want, but it can also be a curse, and I can relate horror stories about trying to tidy up a spreadsheet that somebody had totally mangled all the layout and columns and everything. They put information in the wrong columns, which meant I had to spend months trying to sort it all out and get it all back into a uniform form so I could turn it back into the database it originally came from, which required everything to be in the right place, and they put them wherever they felt like it. So it helps if you're organised, because then you can find things again. So one thing you can do with spreadsheets is a simple list. So that if you want effectively an easy-to-use database that all you want to do is keep a list of something, and it's simply a two-dimensional list with maybe multiple columns for different attributes, there's nothing wrong with using a spreadsheet for that. You can do limited things like sorting it and reordering columns and reordering rows, that sort of thing. So there's some flexibility there. If you want to get fancier and actually be able to do detailed reports and look up information about your data more easily, you probably want to think about a database of some kind, but at least in simple cases, a spreadsheet's usually sufficient. You can also do simple calculations, obvious case being to add up a column of numbers, but there are more complicated formulas, including any cell can reference any other cell or range of cells. So for example, you could have a cell which says, give me the total of everything in this rectangle over here, and it will add up all the rows and columns and give you a single total, or average, or something like that. Or you can calculate the rounded total of these numbers divided by 2 to 2 decimal places if you want to get fancy, or something like that. So there's plenty of options there. And the nice thing about spreadsheets is you can start simple and learn features as you go. You don't have to use all the fancy features. Whoops, accidentally bumped something there. Once you've created a cell with a calculation or a formula that references some other cells, if you change the other information, it automatically updates the destination. So you could have a totaling block, for example. You go and correct one of the numbers in there, the total will be automatically corrected. I have seen people who didn't fully understand spreadsheets who've gone and manually added up columns of numbers and written in the total at the bottom rather than actually getting the spreadsheet to do it for them. And I come back and helped them later on and had to then go through and correct all their totals because they put another line in and forgot to update the last one. So actually using the spreadsheet for what it's intended for is a good idea. Now, if you're familiar with Excel, you'll be, as a sort of the workhorse business spreadsheet, Numbers does have some features which go a bit beyond what Excel can do in some areas. First interesting point is that Numbers is actually a page layout program. You can have pretty much any feature you can do in Pages, you can also do in Numbers. It's mainly aimed at organising tables of things, but you can have tables with other stuff. So you can place tables at specific locations on a page, and you can have more than one table on the same page, and you can add text blocks outside the tables and headings and things like that. So you can do numbered pages, you can do nice pretty headings which appear on every page, header and footer on the pages. You can have a text block which appears explaining what your table's all about, and doesn't actually have to occupy cells in your spreadsheet. It's actually outside the scope of the table completely. So it's actually, if you have a look through the templates that supply with Numbers, they can get quite fancy. Obviously you can use formatting and styled text to make very pretty looking reports. and you can, as I've already mentioned, you can put multiple tables on the same page. So if you've got several pieces of related information which don't actually belong together, typically what you do in Excel is you'd have one block of data here, another block of data somewhere else, which are actually in the same spreadsheet table. So they sort of interact with each other in a slightly complicated way. If you want to insert a row and you've used the left side for one piece of information, the right side for another piece of information, if you insert a row only wanting to affect the left table, you'll also insert a row in the right table because it's occupying the same row. But if they're physically separate tables, you can, I'll get rid of that in the way, if I want to gesticulate. You can insert a row in the left table and not affect the right table at all. So they're independent of each other. And if you do have multiple tables, formulas in table 1 can reference cells in table 2. So you can do a calculation here and then reference it over here and pick up some information and then go and do more calculations with it and push it back again, whatever else you might need to do. So there's plenty of flexibility there. So the other thing you might need to be aware of is the concept of a sheet. A sheet is effectively a way of organising a complex spreadsheet where you want to separate out pieces of it so they're visually distinct. So they're not actually like tables on the same page, they're totally separated when you're looking at it. So you're only looking at one sheet at a time while you're working on the spreadsheet. Each sheet can have multiple tables in numbers. So you could have sheet 1 with 5 tables on it, sheet 2 with 3 tables on it, or whatever you need for your particular document. The nice thing about sheets is if you want to print the spreadsheet, you can print each sheet independently. So you can decide in recent versions of Numbers either print all the sheets or just the one I'm looking at right now. So if you have, for example, and formulas, I'll come back to that in a second, a formula on a table can reference cells on other sheets as well. So if you have a sheet which has information on it that you want to reference, you can have another sheet which pulls information off the other one and displays it differently in some way. The obvious example of what this is useful for is you create a report on a separate sheet which is independent of all the data that the report's being generated from. So you may have a massively large chunk of data, you want to summarise that information, get, say, monthly totals, whatever it might be, and then just have a monthly summary on a separate sheet. So that means you can have totally independently, easily printable small document which references this massively huge document that's got all this information in it. But you don't need to print all that information. And for reference, when you're looking at a Numbers 3 document, you'll see a row of tabs along the top if there are multiple sheets. If there's only one sheet, I think there's a single tab there. Okay, that's all I was going to say as an introduction to Numbers. Just wanted to make sure we know what we're talking about. Sheets, tables, with rows and columns and cells. Okay. So I'll now hop out of Keynote and go into Numbers. Hopefully I got the right version. Yep, and go create a new document. Okay, so here is, double check I've got the right version since I have both versions installed. Yes, that's Numbers 4.2. The first point here is when you start Numbers from scratch, it gives you this template chooser, and you can use this to create new documents at any time. Just to give you an idea of what it can do, you can see something like this travel planner. As you can see, it's got nice pretty pictures in there. It's got a table down here which has got dates and times, activity, location, contact. I don't know if this one does any calculations, but you'll notice that's a formatted date. So if I come in here and type in 1st of the 9th, actually let's go 12th of the 9th, 2017, it should automatically work that out and format it according to the rules of that column. At 5 AM activity, actually that should be September the 13th. Wake up early for iPhone event, question mark. As an example, just location, Apple TV and lounge. Just as an example, I'm just filling in random rubbish here, but that's potential for the date for the Apple Media event at least. It's not confirmed yet. Contact, yes. Apple. So yeah, you can see there the general pattern. That's a simple example. I'll just close that one again, delete that and go create another new one. Some other examples I got there are a checklist, and you can see this has actually got tick boxes in it, so you can have a cell which has a checkbox in it. So you can turn this into whatever kind of list you might want. You can format cells with many different options, tick boxes, dates, times, numbers, in different formats, that sort of thing. The checklist, you can actually count, each checklist tick counts as the number 1. So if you sum up the checklist column, it will tell you how many numbers you got ticked, how many cells you got ticked. Oops, missed it. Come back. Numbers. Numbers, all is forgiven. It's go and close itself. It can also do charts. So if I come in here and change one of these numbers in here and say Andy's had a really good month, then it will automatically adjust the charts when they fall in the entries in the table it's referring. So here's an example of a page which has a block of text there as a text box, a table there which has got 2 columns in it, and it hasn't got headings to the rows but it has the columns, and that's then referenced by a chart which, as you can see from the colours, is referring back to the units sold column, and a different chart there which is a pie chart which is referring to the same information, so it's showing it in 2 different ways. And also along the top here we've got sheets. There's a basic chart, an interactive chart. Now this one's got a slider, so I can actually go drag this up and it will actually resize as I hit various points. So you can actually sort of play with the numbers and see what happens. There's a data comparison one, comparison of units sold, basically this explains all the different sorts of charts too. So product 3, if I change that to 200, you can sort of see the effect that has on the chart. So it's one thing that spreadsheets are often used for is what if. You sort of get your data and then you go and play with the numbers and see what happens in the end result. As long as you know what the correct value is, you can undo and go back to what the right value was. So how much more money do I need to reach my goal or something like that? And if I had this much, what effect would that have on my totals, anything like that? So then it's got 2-axis charts, scatter charts, and bubble charts. So those are just some examples of what sort of charts it can do. Now if I bring up the print command on here, you'll see that it's got an option down here in print, either this sheet or all sheets. So the one I've currently got selected is the chart that we're going to print. I can switch back to a different chart from here, so I can pick the right one, or I can just say I want to print everything. So this is a contrived example, admittedly, but you can imagine if you want to actually have a printed record of your entire spreadsheet, you might choose to print all sheets. Typically, you only print one sheet. Done. Okay.
David, does it give you the ability to select the portion of that you want to print, or does it print the whole page?
As far as I know, that feature does not exist in Pages. I haven't actually had a hunt for it. Typically, what you do is actually create another sheet which had cells which reference the cells you want to print, rather than it being a dynamically choosable range. I know that AppleWorks had that feature, and somebody I know was using it, where they'd actually pick a different range of cells on their spreadsheet every time they wanted to print it. That doesn't translate well to other spreadsheets though, which don't have that feature. So Numbers, as far as I know, can't do that. But if you always want to print the same chunk, creating another sheet that references that chunk is probably the easiest solution. That's my...
You just got a blank, the blank one.
Yep, I'll bring up the blank one now, as that's what I was going to next anyway. So if I go new blank, so that's what a blank one looks like for starters.
If you just select certain cells and then go to print, won't it give you an option to print just...
No, that's what I thought, but I don't think it did. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, the quick brown fox, and then I only select that chunk and go print, it's showing on the left what it would print. I can't see any option there to say only print part of it. So no, as far as I can tell, it's the entire sheet is printed. That's the smallest, or individual pages of the sheet if it's big enough to span more than one page.
What you can do, David, is you mentioned narrow the sheet down. So it prints what it says on the screen.
Yep. The other thing you can do is you can hide columns. So you can actually come in here and say somewhere hide selected columns. So if I hide those columns and then hide those rows and hide those rows, yep, then go into print, it'll only print what's visible. So you can temporarily hide the rest of the spreadsheet and then unhide it. So that's one way of doing it. I'll undo all that again, so I've got back everything. Yep, here we go. Okay, So here is what you normally see if you're starting a blank spreadsheet. So you can see it's got, these are the, as I mentioned, there's your columns, there's your rows. And you normally have a cell selected, or you can drag across a range of cells to select a block of cells or something like that. You can also click headings of columns or rows to select entire rows or columns at once. You can shift click or command click to do the usual Mac rules for range selection or individual item selection. So I can deselect those two rows by command clicking, or I can go click there, shift click there to select that range of rows, or click there, shift click there to select a range of columns. So if you're familiar with that concept in other applications, the same rules apply in a spreadsheet, in numbers at least. And that's that block I just did by click, shift click. So I want to select that block of cells. So
why does it start the numbers on the left-hand side as 1? Because that first row is actually just a header. You don't.
Well, it's an optional header. I can get rid of the header if I didn't want one. So it's still row 1 then. Wrong one, that was the left edge. There's the top edge. So now row 1 is row 1 of data, but it's a rule of all spreadsheets that the first row is always row 1. Every single spreadsheet's done that ever since the first spreadsheet. So it doesn't matter whether it's a header or a body entry, it's always row 1. Same with left column is always A. It's only a header in that it looks different. And there are features such as making the headers, like if I put data 1, data 2 in there, there's actually a setting somewhere, and this is the one I haven't hunted out for it, somewhere in there. Freeze header rows, yep, that'll do it. So it automatically, it's already on, so it retains, as I scroll down you'll see the header row is automatically staying there. In fact, it's on by default. In older versions I had to actually turn that on. So if I have something in the left column, I'll just call it title, as I scroll left you'll see that stays there. So by default the header rows and columns are actually going to stay on the screen at all times while you scroll around it, but you can turn that off. But even though they're headers, you can still reference those cells in formulas. So you can actually have something in the header, like a total for example, and pull that out and grab it somewhere else. So they have to have numbers so it can reference them. So that's just the way that spreadsheets all work.
But David, if you put a whole lot of data down column, that data 1 column, and then you look down at the bottom, you might say, oh, I've got 14 items, but actually you've only got 13 because of...
No, you don't. Well, you wouldn't do it that way. What you do is you select the number of the cells you're interested in. You'll notice on the bottom here it's got this thing saying sum, average, min, max, and count A. And that's actually giving you quick access to calculation results. And you see the block I've selected, there are in fact 15 of them, even though it ends on row 16. So there's that sort of thing you can do. So you can actually use a count formula if you really want to know how many there are. Don't forget also that your header and for both rows and columns can be more than one row or column. You can have a for example, I could have a 4-column header. So that the numbers don't change. It's still, now my data starts in column E rather than being part of the header. So you can adjust the size of your headers as well. Margaret?
Headers. I mean,
Well,
I sometimes ended up getting rid of them because they're too dark for some people.
Well, you can change the style of them, which I don't want to get into really because that's too much detail for tonight. But if you don't actually have anything meaningful to use as a header, you can simply turn them off. So for example, if I don't actually have anything meaningful to put on the left column, I can say have no header on the left. So it's only data there now. So there's still a row header, but there's no column header. So as I scroll sideways, that's just data, but as I scroll vertically, you see that's still a header there. So you can configure that. And if you need to change the style, there are appearance controls for that sort of thing, which you can have a play with. So I don't want to go into that level of detail tonight. Okay, so some basic things you can do with manipulating the data. I actually did this already, but I'll just show you this useful trick. If you have a repeating pattern of something, it's actually got a built-in feature for start with what I've got and continue it. So if I start to type in some numbers here, I'll go 2, 4, 6. What's the next number in this sequence? If I shift click across that range, so I've got the range selected, and as I point to the bottom, you'll notice this little yellow dot in the middle at the bottom. If I point to that, so that the cursor changes to an up and down arrow, and drag, it will work out what the sequence is and extend it. Now then, I don't know how smart this is, but let's just say we're a bit smarter. Oops, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Does it know what this sequence is? No. Does not recognise the Fibonacci sequence automatically. So it didn't know what to do, so it's just repeated the 1. I thought I'd try just to throw it. But I can do doublings, for example, so I can go 1, 2, 4, 8. It should work that one out. No, it doesn't. It just repeats the pattern. So it's only able to recognise sequences, not arithmetic sequences, not geometric sequences. Yep.
So just letters too.
Letters as well, yep. So you can do A, B, C, D, and in fact, I think even one of them will do it. Yes, it does. You don't actually need to select the whole range, so it'll just keep going. It recognises days of the week. So if I type in Monday, it'll automatically fill in the rest of the days of the week. If I type in April, it will recognise days of the month and go fill them in. Don't think it'll recognise country names because there's no obvious order to them or something like that. Margaret?
A few spaces to put a ditto mark in the centre, and then you start with a space on the next line, it'll pop the ditto mark.
Okay, I haven't tried that one, but there's quite a few things that's quite smart about filling in for you. So it can save you a fair amount of typing if you're doing a repeating pattern like that. And if you're typing in dates, it will assume you mean adjacent days, I think, so it'll just keep going up, and it automatically wraps month boundaries. So I've got to make that spreadsheet table bigger. Let's keep going. So I'm up to the 20th of February, and then we hit the 1st of March. So it knew that the February ended on the 28th, so it handles that sort of thing correctly as well. So you can see there's a fair amount of flexibility there in terms of just filling in data automatically. Now, the other sorts of things you can do, and I'd rather switch to a pre-created table at this point. So if I go...
What was the magic formula for selecting? Was it control?
Same as every other application. You click to move the insertion point or selection where you clicked, hold down the Shift key, click at the other end of it to select a continuous range. So Shift click, it's the same in a word processor. You click where you want the insertion point, you Shift click to select a block of text, starting at that position and ending where you are. The other one is Command click, which is a discontinuous selection. So I want to add or remove one cell or one row or one column from my select to or remove it from my selection. So I'll just show you that again. If I select that row and I Command click that row, I get both those rows but nothing else. But if I click that row and Shift click that row, I get the whole block adjacent ones. Okay? Now, I don't want to fiddle with those things without real data there because it's not obvious what they do. I'll just throw that one away and go Open, Recent Folders, that one. So here is a list I prepared earlier. Now, this is getting in the way, this formatting panel on the right, and it's useful to know that you can turn it off with this Format button if you need to see more information on your screen at once. So you see that little thing there saying Format. If I just click that, it hides it. Click that again, it brings it back. Okay, so I'll just take it out of the way in the meantime. So here is getting back to my Wi-Fi network that I'm trying to use to crash devices and work out what's vulnerable. This is the Mac list I've built up of all the Mac models that I know so far with technical information about them. So I'm recording the Mac model, the model identifier, when I got the date, the information about it, the technical detail of the card type of its Wi-Fi interface, the operating system it was running, anything about the security update, the firmware version it reported, and any other notes that I wanted. So you can see I've just been accumulating this list of things. The ones, I haven't bothered to label that checkmark column, it's the ones to remind me I haven't copied those rows into my database where I'm building up a more detailed map of all this information. So this is just my initial list that I'm using to accumulate things. So you can see here I've already filled in, I didn't do anything fancy to format this, I've just left it using the defaults. In a couple of occasions I've done things like make that one italics and that one bold. I did that because this particular computer, I'm guessing what that is based on similarity with a different model, and that one I it was actually not the same as another model of the same type. So I think there was a case where somebody had installed, yes, that one was. It was a friend of mine who'd actually installed his own Wi-Fi card, which wasn't the standard one that Apple had. So I marked that to remind me that it's special. So you can see there most of this is just dates, which I've deliberately entered in ISO format because I like the year, month, day format. So I find that it's unambiguous and it's easy to read, and it also sorts alphabetically as well as in date order, which is quite sometimes handy. The rest of it's just text, because I haven't done any calculations in this one. So it's just a simple list. So, some of the things that I can do with this. Let's say I want to know this firmware information, and I think that shouldn't actually be over there. What you can do to rearrange data is you can pick up a column and drag it around, and let's say I want to put that one in there instead. So you can actually just reorder columns or rows simply by clicking and holding, and then actually these two models are in the wrong order, so I'll just swap. Whoops, it's a bit timing fiddly. Click and hold, and then once you see it pop out, you can go drag and drop. So you can reorder your individual rows in your list, or if I want to do both of those, say, and move them somewhere else, I can do shift click to select the range, click and hold, and then I can pick up those two lines and move them up and down. So you can see there's a fair amount of flexibility there for just reordering data as well in your list. If I try and do the same with something in the middle, it's not going to make sense, so it doesn't actually have the same feature. I can't. Yes, I can actually do that, but it's not, in this case, I don't want to, so I won't actually move it. But you can rearrange a block of text in the same way, a block of cells. You'll notice I haven't named this table, it's just called Table 1. I know what it is, so I didn't bother naming it, but if I wanted to, I could actually come in there and somewhere, click on the title and give it a title. So, and their Wi-Fi firmware, whatever it might be. No, it auto-corrected for me. And I also haven't bothered naming the only sheet, because there is only one, and I'm not going to create another one, so I just left it called Sheet 1. So, some of the other things that I can show you from here, if you want to do a few operations on a row, you can, if you click on an individual cell and control click on it, or use the right click or the secondary click gesture of your mouse or trackpad, which might be a 2-finger tap or click, you can get a list of convenient commands to do to this particular thing. So you can, for example, add row above. If I want to insert a row, I can use that method. So starting wherever I was is an add row above command. However, there's a keyboard shortcut for that. Option up arrow means insert row above. Similarly, option down arrow means insert row below. Option left arrow means insert column left. And option right arrow means insert column right. So if you want to push things around and make more space, it's easy to do that once you know the keyboard shortcuts. And they're actually all listed somewhere. Not sure where, but somewhere they're mentioned, at least in the help of nowhere else. So I knew those from Numbers version 1, and they've stayed the same all through the later versions, so that's, I use them frequently. There's also a little chevron there that appears next to the row, and there's a similar one for columns. If you click on that, it gives you the menu without having to remember to hold down the control key or something like that. So that's that little menu there means do this for the entire rows. So you can do things like add row, delete row, hide row, and for columns it's got add header column before, convert to header column, those sorts of things, delete column. So you can see there's some manipulation tools there. Okay, so I won't bother going through how I typed all that stuff in, but the other point I just wanted to make is the notice the number of columns and the number of rows I've got. Currently I've exactly filled my table. I don't have like going on to infinity, overflowing kind of thing. If I want to add another row at the end, all I need to do is go to the last row and push return, and it'll automatically add another row for me. If I want to go to the right column and decide I want another column, I just push the tab key and it inserts another column which looks like the one I've just moved out of. So it's easy to extend the spreadsheet. I prefer to keep my spreadsheets using the size that they actually need, not going on to thousands of rows which don't have any information in them, because you don't know if there's any information in them. If you have to scroll down through pages and pages to see, is there something in row 7000 just because I happen to put it there? That's one thing I don't like about Excel and that sort of thing. It's good to be able to limit the size of things and have it expand automatically. You can also use this tool here to the sort of 2-line thing to drag the table wider. This column's quite wide, so it's not a good example. It's got to do the row one. If I drag that down, it will create more rows. So I can use that to resize the table. And this corner one will do it in both directions at once. So I can add columns and rows at the same time. Okay, if I go back to the top again, I'll just undo all those changes. So I go, yep, that's back to where I was. And to undo there, I'm just using the Command Z keyboard shortcut. Again, a standard Command Z is the undo command on every Mac application. So it's very helpful if you memorise the common keyboard shortcuts, cut, copy, paste, undo. X, C, V and Z. I use them so heavily that I get frustrated if I'm helping somebody else and they don't know them. They have to go up to the edit menu and choose the commands because I'm just so used to using the shortcuts. I try not to show my frustration. Okay, so any questions about, I'm not going to bother going into much more detail about that. There's a simple list, no calculations, nothing fancy. The next thing I wanted to show you was, I've lost it again, keep forgetting it does that, numbers. A simple calculation example, trip log. Here is a spreadsheet that I use for keeping track of my business trips in my car. This is a cut down version of it. So what I've done here is I've got date, destination, the reason for the trip, what my end odometer reading was and how far I travelled. I've currently deleted all the actual data, I've just left the first and last rows there, so I've got them for reference. So I've got the odometer reading at the start of the month, or the end of the previous 2-month period in fact, and the odometer reading at the end of the month. And down here I've got a calculation. Now notice here this is actually a footer row, which is classified as like a header, but it's at the bottom of the table rather than the top of the table. You can actually configure those over here. So there's actually 3 sorts of headers you can have. There's a header on the left, a header at the top, and a footer at the bottom. You can't do a rightmost column header or right edge. It doesn't have a name apart from anything else, so it doesn't really make sense. So that you can only do it at the top, the left, and the bottom. So that cell there is the first simple example I'm going to give you of a formula. So what that one does, if you look down the bottom of the screen here, you'll see it says D3 minus D2. So what that's actually doing, and it's colour-coded in to show you what it's doing, it's saying take the value in that cell and subtract the value in that cell. So it automatically calculates how far I've travelled in that 2-month period, which is 2,090 kilometres. So if I come in here and change this one, because I made a mistake when I was typing it in, it should actually be 78890. As soon as I push return, watch the number at the bottom, it changes by 1 because I've now travelled 1 kilometre further. So you can see that's the auto update. I'll go back to where I was. The date column on the left is just a date. It doesn't actually have any calculations in it. I've just formatted it like year, month, day, because it's day, month, year, sorry, because that's why I normally look at things if I'm not doing internationally viewable stuff. Now I want to add a trip that I've actually done this month. So I'll use the Option down arrow keyboard shortcut. I type in the date, let's say on the 14th of April. I only type in 14/4 and tab. Oh, it didn't work, why not? Because it's not a date column? Possibly not. Let's check that. Aha. Right, this is where it helps if you actually configure your spreadsheet correctly in advance. So this was working in numbers 2, but it doesn't work in numbers 3 unless I tell it what I'm doing. So I want this to be a date. So what I do is I select the column heading, and rather than being data format automatic, I want to say data format date and time. And if I do that, I now specify I want my date format to look like, prefer that one I think, it doesn't need to have zeros inserted, and I don't want any times in there, so I'm going to go none. So there we are. Now I'll come back in there and type it in again, so I'll type in a different date just to show you. If I type in 12/4 and press tab, it assumes I'm in the current year, so it just filled in the year for me. So you don't need to go and type in /17 or /2017. So it just recognises it correctly. Let's say I was going to visit Margaret Gordon. First person I see in the audience. And reason for trip, actually no, the destination I normally, I'll make up where I'm going, CBD. Reason for trip, Margaret Gordon, just so her knowing who I'm going to visit. At the end of that trip, my odometer had got to 79103. That's just a reference so I know where I was in the month. And for that particular trip, I travelled 20 kilometres. bingo, there's another calculation, which if you look at this one, you'll see it says sum of distance. So it's picked out the name from the heading and it automatically filled that in, and it's adding up the entire column. It knows not to include itself in the footer row as part of the total, and it ignores the fact that the header row doesn't contain a number, so it's adding up all the numbers as they appear in here. So if I come in here and just fill in some more numbers without bothering to type in the extra information, you'll see that as I type those in, we automatically get the calculation updating. So I've travelled quite a lot for that trouble. It must have gone to Hamilton or something.
If you double click on the calculation at the bottom, is that give you the formula?
Yep. That's how you can edit the formula there, but it's also shown down the bottom, and I think you can double click it there. No, that's just showing you it. So if you actually wanted to create this formula, what you normally do, if I delete it, so it's not there anymore, the way you create a formula is you start by pushing the equals key. So that pops up the function entry thing, and it helps if you know the formulas, but it gives you this convenient guide across the right hand side, so you can see it's got all formulas, recent ones. If we want what's financial? That's probably more numeric, is probably what we want. They're all the numeric functions, and there's an obvious one in here, sum. So if you didn't know what the word was, you could just have a hunt through it. How do I add numbers up? So there we are, I want sum. So I can go insert function. What do I want it to be? And so it fills in a placeholder value. If I click on that and I actually say I want to add up that column, whoops, not twice, and then I go tick or just press return, then it will fill that in again. So that's how I created it. So if I wanted to type it in, I simply type equals sum of, I put a bracket, open bracket there, E, which means column E, close bracket, return. So it's quite easy to type them in once you're familiar with them. So that's a very simple case. Another way of doing that particular case, since it's such an easy calculation, is I can actually click the entire column, and you'll see it's got these placeholder things down the bottom. It's giving me the sum, giving me the answers for sum, average, min, max, and count there. I can actually pick that up and drag and drop it. Well, I should be able to. Didn't work. Why not? Interesting. It won't let you do it, it appears.
Yeah, it's selected, that's all.
You can't drag it into the area it's selected.
Yeah.
If I have to, that's a slight glitch, I have to actually select just everything apart from that cell. Now it'll let me do it. But now it's only counting those rows. So if I insert another row at the bottom, you'll notice that this formula, wrong one, formula does not include, oh that did, I'd have to insert a row above this one. It won't include that row there because it's only doing a block, not a whole column. So those ones at the bottom won't let you drag it into the rectangle that you currently got selected, unfortunately, so not quite right. But in this case, what I could actually do, because of the structure of my table, I've got a sort of a starting and an ending line, I can actually do it slightly more sensibly. I can say, drag across that block there, and now go sum. Because what that means is, as long as I insert rows after my initial line and before my last line, they'll automatically go into that sum. So I can come in here, say I want another row there, type in a 50, and that is still the correct range. So a good practice to get into when you're creating formulas and spreadsheets.